it up. Peter B. Collins is going to be here shortly, and we're going to talk about Hunter Biden's laptop. Rudy,
Exciting.
Rudy Giuliani is a madman, out of his mind. Turns out there was stuff on the laptop that we should have seen. There were emails about business dealings in Ukraine that the American people should have seen and would have seen had it been Eric Trump's laptop. But when this was going on in 2020, it just seemed like chaos and it felt political. The same way Benghazi was politicized, and the Republicans wouldn't let go of it. And I can't help but thinking there was something else to Benghazi that had we pursued it, something really embarrassing would have come out. Do you get that sense that the Republicans knew something that was incredibly compromising about the attack on the embassy, and they wanted to keep pressing and pressing because they knew that there was another piece of the Benghazi puzzle that had it come out, it would have destroyed Hillary and Obama. Do you get that sense that we haven't heard the whole story of Benghazi?
Well, I don't remember all of the details of what came out and what the Republicans were alleging. I mean, I never believed that the Republicans are good faith interlocutors on behalf of the public interest. So one can take a jaundiced, perspective on their attempt to politicize it. But I certainly do not believe that. That we've received the full story about what was happening. I mean, there have been so many revelations about U.S. involvement, and of course, everyone in these countries, in the Middle East, suspects the U.S. embassy as being basically the headquarters for various intelligence operations. It's just a question of when and how accurate information might come to light to really explain it. But I agree with you that it's worth being suspicious and basically thinking that we don't have the full story, and that's not, you can't rely on the Republicans to, unearth it. But there might be some very serious and compromising, information about U.S. So-called diplomacy and the use of State Department for intelligence purposes that could come to light at some point.
Let us now go to Peter B. Collins in San Rafael, California. All right, let's talk about the Biden family, the laptop, and Ashley Biden. I'm uncomfortable bringing this up. So there is a diary that we're pretty sure was Joe Biden's diary, to Joe Biden's daughter's diary, that was stolen while she was in rehab. And it was spread around the RNC. People were reading passages from it, and there are purportedly accusations made as this troubled woman is going through a rehab, allegations against her father. Had the diary belonged to Ivanka, what would have, and we got our hands on Ivanka's diary. It was stolen. Nobody's entitled to read Ivanka's diary. But had there been embarrassing evidence inside the diary about Donald Trump, what would I be saying? Somebody who rabidly hates Donald Trump, who wants him, I want the whole family locked up. I hate the Trump family. If somebody stole Ivanka's diary and there was some stuff in it that was pretty embarrassing to the old man, what would I say about it?
Well, I would not be presumptuous enough to speak for you, Mr.
What do you
Feldman.
give? What do you think? I would say,
Well, I'm pretty rigid about this, that privacy is privacy.
mhm.
And let's make a very clear distinction here between Ashley Biden and Hunter Biden. Ashley has never taken a fat paycheck from a foreign country. To my knowledge, she's never worked as a registered lobbyist, as her brother has. And I don't judge people with addiction issues, including Hunter. He's made a lot of bad choices. He's hung out with a lot of low life people. Uh, but that's not my problem and not my place to judge. Where I come down is that Ashley deserves her privacy, and that, however, her diary fell into the hands of people who thought about publishing it.
Project
Uh,
Veritas, James O'Keefe.
well, and those people are low life, right wing propagandists, and so to my knowledge, even O'Keefe has not released that. Is that still the case?
I think they passed it around in 2020 at a RNC fundraiser.
But I
Uh,
don't think it has been publicly
I
um,
think I think you're right.
released.
Right.
So that is the first time I could say something good about James O'Keefe, because if in fact he decided for uh, personal reasons and respect for her privacy, as opposed to the threat of lawsuits, to avoid or refrain from publishing that, then he made the right decision. Uh, Hunter Biden is a very different story. He left behind not just one, but three different laptops. He was so careless with the information that he wishes had remained private. And the materials on, in particular, the laptop that was left at the computer repair shop in Wilmington, Delaware. It was then unpaid for, and under Delaware law became the property of the shop owner. He probably through intermediaries delivered the contents to the New York, not the Post, I think it's the Daily News. And
The Post. I think it was the Post.
okay, let me double check here. I think it was initially,
Well, the Post is demanding an apology from the.
so you are correct. It went to the Post. I thought the Daily News had a piece of it, but I'm wrong.
It's Murdoch owns the. I think Murdoch owns
You're
the
correct.
Post. Yeah.
Yes. So on that laptop is evidence of potentially criminal behavior and extremely poor judgment in the way Hunter Biden utilized his father's name and position to put money into his own pockets, often under terms that you and I would find pretty scurrilous, if not illegal. So these two issues, and I'm glad you raised the diary, because I think it helps people contextualize that the relatives, the family members of public figures, I think do deserve a zone of privacy. And I really don't want to see Ivanka's diary. If she publishes a book about her years loving her daddy in the White House by volunteering along with her husband, Jared Kushner, that's fair game. She is self-disclosing whatever she chooses to say in a book like that. But, David, I commented last week when we talked with Trevor Aronson about the case in Michigan, the Wolverine watchdogs on trial, claiming a very reasonable case of entrapment by the FBI. And I closed out by saying, we'll never know to what extent the phony elements of the Wolverine watchdog story moved voters when it was the October surprise. And likewise, the Hunter Biden laptop story was an October surprise. And the media went into hyperdrive to shut down any access to the contents of Hunter's laptop. They delayed efforts to authenticate the emails that were on there. And the New York Times led that charge to bury the story. They did cover their ass by publishing an article in October of 2020, where they said that, well, you know, we cannot independently prove these claims that this is a Russian disinformation campaign. And this is another extended element of the Russiagate scandal, as used by Democratic Party leaders to manipulate and mislead its own party members. And to revert to this, okay, we got a problem. October surprise, Hunter's laptop. What do? Crisis management. Well, we blame Russia. And we now have some vindication, because last week on March 16, the New York Times published a story under the headline, "Hunter Biden Paid Tax Bill, but Broad Federal Investigation Continues." And they acknowledged that the work of, and for our YouTube audience, I'm holding up the book, The Bidens by Ben Schreckinger.
We have to have him on the show.
I did it again, David. I emailed him at his personal website last Thursday and said, Ben, we want to have you on the David Feldman podcast. And so far, I've gotten silence from him. But this book, which does not comment on the media blackout of the Hunter laptop story, and I think that's a weakness of the book, nevertheless establishes that the emails were authentic. And Schreckinger did it by going to people who'd been copied on these emails and saying, could you send me your copy of this email that came from Hunter or one of his cronies? Maybe he'd prefer colleagues. And so they painstakingly showed that verbatim, these emails were accurate, not a word had been changed. And there's absolutely no evidence that Russia was involved in any way in the Hunter laptop imbroglio. And the Times finally admitted that last week. That led to a pretty powerful recap of the whole episode from Glenn Greenwald. And if you don't want to pay to see his Substack, Bob Scheer at the Scheer Post published this column by Greenwald last week. And I don't always agree with Greenwald. He can be somewhat hysterical. For example, he claims that, you know, we're about to see another big civil liberties crackdown related to the investigation of January 6th. Glenn, you're entitled to your opinion, but I don't agree with that. In this case, he's done incredible work. And let's remember that Glenn Greenwald lost his six-figure post at The Intercept. We didn't embarrass Trevor Aronson with this last week because Trevor didn't have anything to do with the spiking of Greenwald's story. That's Betsy Reed, the editor-in-chief's job. But in October of 2020, Greenwald wrote a piece that holds up to this day to be very perceptive and to have asked the right questions about whether Hunter Biden violated the Foreign Agents Reporting Act with both Burisma in Ukraine and with the deal he was struggling to put together with interests in China. And the China story is still not fully revealed. We know that Hunter and his associates received payments that totaled about $5 million from Hong Kong affiliates of the Chinese company that he was trying to do business with. And there was this, people, you have to watch the news every day to remember this one, but there was this guy who briefly surfaced named Tony Bobulinski. And he was treated like Rudy Giuliani with the hair dye running down his face. But it turns out Bobulinski was telling the truth. He was in the inner circle there. He was copied on many of these emails. And the central claim that Joe Biden appears to have lied about. Again, if all of these emails are accurate, we have no reason to believe that they are not. Biden has said, I've never talked to my son or my brother about any of their business activities. Well, that doesn't hold up to close scrutiny. I can't yet call it a lie, David, but it is contradicted to a great extent by what has been revealed. And Hunter and these other people, including Bobulinski, traded an email where they were reserving 10% of their get for the big guy. Now, the big guy isn't Jim Biden because Jim Biden had his own share. The big guy isn't Hunter because Hunter had his own share. So these are very serious issues. And this is why, coupled with Hunter's deep addiction problem.
Doesn't he say in the emails that my job is to make money for my father, that he's never earned a penny in his life? He's been living on the government dime, and it's my job to make him rich. Isn't that in the emails?
I haven't seen that, David.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, the point is that, Hunter has taken himself on a trip to hell and back many times.
You're talking about Yale Law School.
Well, I'm talking about the Yale graduate who turned a crack, who was sleeping with his dead brother's wife for a while, who took up with a crack dealer, a woman who I believe had a pretty lengthy criminal record. And, against that backdrop, he was cashing in on his father's name and position. And, this is all now lost in the fog of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We may never get to the bottom of the Hunter saga with Burisma. But just on the face of it, it is tawdry. It is a form of nepotism by proxy, where it doesn't appear Joe Biden personally introduced his son to the people at Burisma, but they knew that they weren't hiring David Feldman's child.
And Burisma is run by a Ukrainian oligarch who was criminal. He fled, I believe, I think he ended up in Monaco. He was looting Ukraine. And the West wanted in on the looting of Ukraine. They were making deals with oligarchs the same way we made deals with oligarchs in Russia. And Hunter with Burisma wanted in on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was it was a dishonest business. Burisma was dishonest. It was run by somebody who was dishonest.
So now we have the Merrick Garland Justice Department, and I don't envy the Attorney General having to run an investigation of the president's son. That's awkward. But we have seen, and this is not a slam at Garland himself, but the investigation of Donald Trump for fraud in his business dealings, misrepresenting the value of his properties in order to get loans, and then giving lowball figures on the values of those same properties to tax officials. This appears to have evaporated as the newly elected district attorney in New York City caused the two key prosecutors who were hired for this case to quit.
You're talking about Alvin Bragg.
Yes. And now the Justice Department has to investigate Hunter Biden. He has paid back apparently all or most of the unpaid taxes he was accused of. And so he's going to try to skate. And they're now talking about pursuing the failure to register under FARA claim as a civil suit, which would be settled with a fine and no criminal conviction. And this is a pattern that we saw previously related to Mike Flynn.
Right. FARA, that's you have to register as a lobbyist for a foreign country, but nobody gets prosecuted for FARA.
Well, I was about to say that, Mike Flynn, who was the 30-day or less national security advisor under Trump, he had accepted $500,000 to lobby for Turkey. And Bob Mueller said, oh, no big deal. Just go ahead and file the papers retroactively. And there really wasn't that much on Flynn related to his contact with the Russian ambassador. So that was one of those stories that was blown way out of proportion.
Well,
but fundamentally, they're going soft on these FARA violations, as you suggest.
I'm going to circle back to Michael Flynn in a second. Hunter Biden owed $1 million in taxes. The fact that he was caught owing $1 million, took out a loan to pay off the $1 million, that doesn't exonerate him. If you owe $1 million to the IRS and they come to you, that's criminal. The fact that you eventually pay it off doesn't mean anything.
Right. And the Times wrote about this and they said, well, in practice, even juries are likely to go soft on people who've already paid the debt.
That's why they're not supposed to know if you've paid off the debt.
Right.
Right. As for Michael Flynn, was it Kislyak? Who was the Russian?
Kislyak.
Kislyak. Would you agree? I know you poo-poo Russiagate. I don't, but I don't want to argue with you about this because we're arguing about a fact. The Russians either helped Trump or they didn't, and we can argue the degree into which they helped. But I believe anyway.
Well, I'm in the Lee camp, and you did a great interview with Lee last week.
Oh, thank you.
But I agree with him that Russia's assistance to Trump was minor, not significant, and the real division of the American people was done domestically, not from outside the country.
Okay, the Michael Flynn, National Security Advisor. The Obama administration was angry about Russian meddling in the 2016 election. They, as a lame duck president, he instituted economic sanctions against Russia to punish them for what Obama's intelligence agencies believed was election meddling.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael Flynn was going to be the National Security Advisor. Pretty important job, right? This is the job Condi Rice had. This was Henry Kissinger's job. This is an important job. Michael Flynn, General Michael Flynn, calls up Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, and says, and he's not the official, Trump is not president yet.
Right, he's an appointee.
And he says, don't have Putin respond to these economic sanctions. Once we get into the White House, Trump is going to get rid of those sanctions. And then the FBI came around when he was National Security Advisor, like a month later, and he denied that he spoke to the Russian ambassador. So he violated, I believe it's the Logan Act. I always confuse the Logan Act and the Hatch Act. I believe it's the
Logan. Yes, you're right.
You're not allowed to say you're representing the United States and negotiate with foreign leaders on behalf of the United States. He was undermining the Obama administration, but lying to the FBI about talking to the Russian ambassador when he was the National Security Advisor, that's certainly suspect. He was unqualified to be our National Security Advisor, and he's proven such.
Yes.
He is, I don't want to get, I mean, he's a loon.
Yes.
He is a loon. He is dangerous. The stuff he said in the lead up to January 6th, the stuff, he's not a good guy.
Mhm.
And
And Obama warned Trump about him in their
right,
meeting on November 5th or whatever it was after the election.
right.
Obama also fired Flynn. We think it was because Flynn challenged the consensus regarding the threat of the Islamic State. And it was Flynn's agency that had actually authored the document that said that they suspected there would be the rise of an Islamic State, not called the Islamic State, it was just a descriptor. So, Flynn has a history, and there's no question that he is a loony guy. Let's work with your term. But Sally Yates was the acting attorney general in the interim there. She attended the January 3rd meeting in the White House where they
The
talked about
Obama
what they
White
were
House.
going to.
This is the Obama.
Correct. Yeah, they're waiting the inauguration. So they're 2.5 weeks out. And then, of course, the Friday of that week, which was January 5th, was when Comey and Clapper went to meet with Trump and to brief him. And that's when they brushed him with the dossier and the P-tape allegation. So if you look at Russiagate as an effort by Democrats and the Obama administration to either discredit or reduce Trump's effectiveness, or even possibly, try to impeach him, this can be seen as part of that. Now, I'm not in any way embracing Mike Flynn, and lying to the FBI is a crime. It's kind of a wobbler, and they don't always enforce it, very effectively. Also, it's just plain stupid that Mike Flynn, who knows all of our surveillance systems, because he was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, uh, he should have known that the FBI listened in on the phone call with Kislyak, and there was no point for him to lie. I can't explain why he did that. I'm glad he got run out of the administration. But fundamentally, I view it as an extension of Russiagate.
Right, which I don't want to argue with you. Although you have, and Lee, I am rereading some books about Russiagate, and I believe there was smoke.
Okay. David, the biggest thing that you raised with Lee Camp last week that resonated with me is the still not fully investigated claims that the NRA laundered money from Russia and spent it on Trump. And there is a nexus there because the NRA used the same media buying firm that Trump did. So it would be fairly easy to place a media buy and claim it was from Make America Great Again, but it was actually using laundered funds from the NRA. But Maria Butina is a straw figure. She was not a Russian agent. She was treated as a hero when she was finally returned to Moscow after serving a year in American prisons. But she was a bit player, and she could not have delivered that kind of millions of dollars from Russian interests to the NRA. But I still think that's worthy of deeper investigation.
Right, and she could have made it easy for them to. We're not talking about McQueen, that advertising.
No.
It's a different. Yeah, we have to wrap up, but you've got me revisiting Russiagate. So
okay. And I want to thank you for revisiting Libya in particular with Adnan Hussein. And I just wanted to add one comment that the whole Benghazi hearings that were where Hillary had to sit there for 11 hours and all that stuff, they knew they had her over a barrel. The barrel was that the CIA had this secret site 1.5 miles from the consulate. They were running Libyan munitions to the war in Syria from there. she could not go public. Her talking points and the misleading talking points that Susan Rice delivered early on after the Benghazi assault, they were written at Langley. And so both Hillary and Susan Rice and the Republicans who were questioning them knew what they weren't allowed to talk about in public. And so they kept just, drilling into Hillary, trying to get her to lose her temper, make a mistake. She did get a little testy, but I give her credit for just being able to take the incoming and not really give up much.
You answered a question that Professor Hussein and I were kicking around. So you're saying kind of like what I said, but you actually have the information. I suspected Benghazi was about something else, and you're saying that there was illegal gun running going on that wasn't sanctioned by Congress, kind of like Contragate. Would this be Contragate? Tantamount?
It was a clone. And Seymour Hersh is the source, the original source for that. And it's been pretty well publicly established since then.
This is really interesting. Thank you, because we should have impeached Ronald Reagan for violating the Boland Amendment, which said you cannot give arms to the Contras who were trying to overthrow the Sandinistas. No money to go to the Contras. And Oliver North violated the Boland Amendment, which specifically forbade giving arms to the Contras by selling missiles to the Iranians and get the hostages out. But that money was then given to the Contras. Congress has to be consulted. They control the purse strings. If Hillary was running guns to whom in Libya, she was violating the Constitution, and you cannot do that without Congress's permission. That's a big thing, what you're saying.
Hillary had deniability because the operation was run by the CIA, not the State Department. State knew about it. They certainly were briefed because they sent for reinforcements from the CIA site when the consulate came under attack.
That's an impeachable offense. That is did Obama know this? That we were secretly?
I'm sure he did. I'm sure he authorized. But they do these things with that, plausible deniability, and it makes it very tough to hold them accountable.
Who were we supporting in Syria?
The Syrian, the Free Syrian Army, which was Kurdish paid fighters, and
right,
the schlubs that we spent $30 billion training, and they slipped away in 3 days with all our money.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, and Marianne has the right line: the moderate terrorists in Syria. Yep.
Wow, this was a lot for me to look into. Thank you. You're amazing. Peter B. Collins.
I enjoy being with you, David.
Thank you. Bay Area Radio Hall of Famer. Please go to peterbcollins.com for a treasure trove of this man's radio shows, podcasts, and interviews. And thank you.
You're welcome. Great to see you. Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you are you kidding? Thank you. We're honored.
I hate that line.
I should have said thank you for being had. That works.